Rose growers know this particular disappointment. You stand at your back fence in June, and 10 feet over your head, there is a crown of pink bloom, dozens of flowers packed against the sky. Then your eye travels down, and there they are, 6 feet of bare green cane, leafless in stretches, not one flower below the gutter line. The rose looks like a man wearing a party hat and nothing else. Every year you tell yourself it just needs a harder pruning. So why does the plant that gets cut back hardest every March keep giving you less? I asked that question for 11 years before anyone gave me the honest answer, so let me save you the decade. The problem was never the pruning. Pruning is the wrong tool entirely for this job. The fix is the bend, not the blade. Tonight, I want to walk you through why a climbing rose refuses to flower low on a vertical cane, what is actually happening inside that stem at the level of plant chemistry, and the simple sideways training method that turns a bare fence into a wall of roses from your knees to the top rail. Everything I am going to show you was worked out generations ago by rosarians, orchard growers, and one legendary English rose garden in Hampshire, and it costs you nothing but a ball of soft twine and an afternoon. But this story does not start with a pruning saw, it starts with a lie built into the plant's own name. A climbing rose does not climb. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it rearranges everything. Ivy climbs. English ivy grips a brick wall with thousands of tiny rootlets, little adhesive holdfasts that cement themselves to mortar. Clematis climbs. A clematis vine wraps its leaf stalks around a wire like a child curling a finger. A grapevine throws out tendrils that grab and coil. A climbing rose has none of that equipment. No tendrils, no holdfasts, no twining stems, nothing. What it has are long, flexible canes, some backward-hooking thorns that let it scramble through shrubs and hedgerows in the wild, and a great deal of ambition. In your garden, on a smooth cedar fence or a painted arbor, that rose cannot attach itself to anything. What you actually own is a very long shrub leaning on your patience. Follow that one step further. Every single cane position on a trained climbing rose is a human decision. The rose proposes and you dispose. Where each cane runs, what angle it holds, whether it goes up, sideways, or in a spiral around a porch post. All of that is chosen by the person holding the twine. If your rose is a bare pole with a top knot, the plant did not do that to you. Nobody did it on purpose, but the arrangement was made at the end of someone's arm. Probably yours, probably mine. Mine for 11 years, on a rose beside my garden shed that I tied straight up like a flagpole and then blamed for its own bare legs. Before we get to the fix, you need 2 words of rose anatomy, because the whole method hangs on telling 2 kinds of growth apart. Look at a mature climbing rose at the base. Rising out of the crown, you will see the main canes. These are the thick ones, pencil thick to broom handle thick, long, structural. Think of them as the skeleton of the plant, the permanent framework. A healthy climber might carry anywhere from 4 to 8 of them. You almost never remove a main cane. It stays for years, sometimes a decade or more, and it only comes out when it is dead, diseased, or rubbing another cane raw. Now look closer along the length of any older main cane. You will see short side branches growing off it, usually 6 inches to 2 feet long. Those are the laterals, and the laterals are the whole show because on a climbing rose, the laterals carry every flower you will ever see. The main cane is the scaffold, the lateral is the bloom. Training works on the main canes, and the reward arrives on the laterals that the training creates. Keep those 2 straight, and the rest of this video will feel like it clicks into place. So here is the real question, and it sat unanswered in my head for years while I sharpened my pruners and made everything worse. If a main cane is dotted with buds along its entire length, and every one of those buds could become a flowering lateral, why does a vertical cane only ever grow laterals at the very top? The answer has a name, and the name is apical dominance. Apical from apex, the tip. The bud at the very top of a vertical stem, the apical bud, grows most vigorously, and while it grows, it actively suppresses every bud below it. Not by shading them, not by stealing their water. It suppresses them chemically with a hormone. The hormone is called auxin, and it is manufactured continuously in the growing tip of the cane. From the tip, Auxin flows downward through the stem, and as it travels down, it works like a sedative on every dormant bud it passes. Each of those lower buds is alive. Each one is capable of breaking into a flowering lateral tomorrow. But as long as the tip above them keeps pumping auxin down the line, they stay asleep. The plant is running a strict company policy. One boss at the top, everyone else waits. And this is not garden folklore. It is one of the founding discoveries of plant science and the experiment that proved it is a small masterpiece. In 1933, two plant physiologists, Kenneth Thimann and Volker Skoog, working with young bean plants, did the obvious thing first. They cut off the shoot tip. Within days, the lower buds woke up and started growing, exactly as gardeners had observed for centuries when they pinched a plant to make it bushy. Then came the elegant part. Onto the cut stump where the tip had been, Thimann and Skoog applied the isolated hormone, auxin, in a paste, and the lower buds went back to sleep. Remove the tip, the buds wake. Paint the hormone onto the cut, the buds sleep again. The tip itself was never the ruler. The chemical it produced was the ruler. 90 years of research have added layers of detail, other hormones, sugar signals, the whole committee, but the core finding from that 1933 experiment still stands underneath every espaliered pear tree and every trained rose on earth. Now, here is where it turns from laboratory science into the best trick in flower gardening, and I want you to picture the geometry. Auxin's suppressing power depends on the cane standing upright. The signal is strongest flowing straight down from a topmost tip to the buds stacked directly beneath it. Take that same cane in a gloved hand and bend it over toward horizontal, slowly, gently, until it lies almost flat along a fence rail. What just happened, from the plant's point of view, is a small revolution. There is no longer any bud that is meaningfully the top. The tip that used to be the boss is now sitting off to one side at the same height as everybody else, and its downward chemical grip on the buds along the cane collapses. The staff at the New York Botanical Garden, who train climbers this way on their own garden structures, put it more plainly than any textbook I have read. Once the main stem is tied down toward horizontal, it loses its dominance, and the side shoots all think they are in charge. And what does a shoot that thinks it is in charge do? It grows and it flowers. One bent cane can break 20, 30, 40 new laterals along its length in a season, each one a flowering shoot, spaced along the cane like candles on a mantle. The same rose that gave you a top knot on a pole will give you a garland on a rail. Identical plant, identical roots, identical variety. The only thing that changed was the angle. I need to be honest about my shed rose here, because it is a little embarrassing. The year I finally untied it, bent the 3 longest canes down along the fence and tied them off nearly flat, I did it in late winter with low expectations. That June, the old vertical section still gave me the usual puff up top, but the bent canes threw laterals along their whole length, and by midsummer there were roses blooming 18 inches off the ground on a plant that had not flowered below 8 feet in a decade. My neighbor asked what I had planted. Nothing. I had planted nothing. I had just stopped fighting a hormone with a pair of pruners, which raises the practical question you're probably asking your screen right now. How flat is flat? Do the canes have to lie perfectly horizontal, like a shelf? No, and this is a relief because most garden structures will not allow it anyway. The working rule among rosarians is a range. Train your main canes anywhere between dead horizontal and about 45 degrees. The flatter the cane, the more laterals will break along it. So horizontal is the ideal, and 45 degrees is the outer edge of useful. Anything steeper than 45 and you are drifting back toward the flagpole and the party hat. Philip Harkness, whose family firm, Harkness Roses, has been breeding roses in England since 1879, gives the advice in one line: try to tie the stems more horizontally than vertically, because a horizontal stem will generate lots of lateral flowering shoots along its length. And he adds the encouragement every nervous gardener needs to hear. You will be amazed how much you can bend the stems without breaking them, and if one does snap, fear not, make a clean cut and it will grow again next summer. I can vouch for both halves of that. A green rose cane bends far further than your instincts expect, a long, slow arc that feels alarming the first time. And I can vouch for the snapping too, having heard that particular wet crack more than once. The plant shrugged it off every time. A clean cut just below the break, and by the following summer there was a fresh cane rising to replace it. The tying itself matters more than gardeners think. Use soft materials, garden twine, strips of old cloth, anything with a little give, and tie each cane loosely. A loose figure eight, looping the cane to the wire or rail with room to spare. That cane is going to thicken every year for the rest of its life, and a tie that fits today will strangle it in 3 seasons. Never use bare wire cinched tight against the bark. Wire cuts in as the cane swells, and the gash it opens is a doorway for disease. Twine rots and gets replaced, and that is exactly the point. Check your ties once a year and retie anything snug. 30 seconds per cane, and it prevents the slow girdling that quietly kills more trained climbers than any winter does. So the principle is sideways, the range is horizontal to 45 degrees, and the ties are soft and loose. Now let us put it on your actual structure, because a fence, an arbor, and a pillar each ask for a different shape. Start with the most common situation, a fence or a wall. The classic pattern here is the fan. Stand at the base of the rose and spread the main canes out from the crown, like the fingers of an open hand laid against the fence, the lowest canes trained nearly flat along the bottom wires. The middle canes angled outward, the upper canes rising steeper but never past that 45-degree mark until they too can be turned sideways. A fan does two jobs at once. It fills the whole face of the fence, corner to corner, instead of one vertical stripe, and it puts every cane into the angle range where laterals break freely. On a long fence, Paul Zimmerman, an American rosarian who has spent his career teaching people to stop being afraid of roses, uses a weaving method on trellis panels that I have copied for years. When a cane grows out to the edge of the panel, do not let it turn upward and escape. Turn it around. Weave it back across the trellis the other way, a few inches higher than its last pass. Back and forth, side to side, the cane laddering up the panel in long, shallow zigzags. One cane train that way can cover a panel that would swallow 3 canes trained straight up, and every pass is a horizontal run lined with future flowers. One more detail for solid surfaces, and it is the detail that saves you from black spot and mildew heartache later. If you are training against a solid wall or a board fence, do not fix the canes directly against the surface. Mount a trellis or a set of horizontal wires standing 2 to 3 inches off the face on spacer blocks or eye bolts, and tie the canes to that. Those few inches of gap let air move behind the plant. A rose pressed flat against sun-warmed boards sits in its own still, humid pocket, and still, humid air is exactly what fungal disease is waiting for. 2 inches of breathing room and the foliage dries by mid-morning. It is the cheapest disease prevention in rose growing. And keep a little twine in your pocket, because the structure waiting after the arbor is the one that looks impossible to train sideways at all. An arbor asks for a gentler version of the same thinking. The temptation at an arbor is to run the canes straight up the posts, because the posts are vertical and the rose is long, and it seems obvious. Carry each cane up the post at an angle instead, crossing the face of the post diagonally so that even the climb toward the arch happens at a slant. Where 2 or 3 canes rise on the same post, angle them across one another in a loose braid rather than a parallel sprint to the top. Every degree of vertical is borrowed bloom. Then, when the canes reach the arch itself, they get to run truly horizontal over your head, and that curved crown becomes the most heavily flowered part of the structure, a ceiling of roses you walk beneath. But if the posts were trained straight, you get the ceiling and nothing at eye level. Trained at an angle, the whole doorway blooms, fence, trellis, and arbor covered. The Flower Gardener's Bible carries all 38 plants plus the zone-by-zone monthly calendar, $9 at bloomrelay.co. The illustrated book cover and the URL are on your screen now. And then there is the pillar, the porch post, the obelisk, the structure that seems to make horizontal training impossible. A pillar is nothing but vertical. Here, the old rosarians came up with something I think is genuinely beautiful: the barber pole spiral. You take each main cane and coil it gently around and around the post as it rises, like the stripe on a barber's pole, each wrap climbing only a little higher than the last. Look at what that spiral really is geometrically. At any given point, the cane is running nearly sideways, circling, gaining height only gradually. It is horizontal training wrapped around a vertical object. The auxin cannot find a top because the cane never truly goes up, it only goes around, and buds break into flowering laterals along the whole coil. A pillar rose trained straight up gives you a tuft at the finial. A pillar rose spiraled gives you a column of bloom, top to bottom, that looks from across the garden like a pillar built out of roses. This is not my invention, and it is not new. It is the standard method on the rose poles at one of the most famous rose gardens in the world, which is where I want to take you next. Because there is a place where everything in this video has been running as a public demonstration for 50 years. The place is Mottisfont Abbey in Hampshire, in the south of England, an old priory on the River Test that belongs to the National Trust. In the early 1970s, the Trust's gardens advisor, a horticulturist named Graham Stewart Thomas, was given the old brick-walled kitchen garden there to house something he had spent decades quietly assembling. Thomas had spent his career hunting down old rose varieties, the shrub roses bred before the year 1900, roses that were vanishing from commerce because they mostly bloom just once a year, and the market had moved on to repeat flowering hybrids. He begged cuttings from old estates, tracked forgotten varieties through hedgerows and churchyards, grew them on, identified them by bloom shape and leaf and thorn, and saved many from extinction outright. At Mottisfont, he planted them as the national collection of pre-1900 shrub roses. Today, the walled garden there holds over 500 varieties and more than 1,500 individual rose plants, and for a few weeks every June, when the whole collection flowers at once, people travel from around the world to stand inside it. Here is why Mottisfont matters to you and your fence. Almost nothing in that garden is allowed to grow the way it wants. Walk the walled garden in winter when the structure shows, and you are looking at a museum of the bend. Roses trained at wooden poles, their shoots spiraled around and around in that barber pole coil precisely to force laterals into bloom along the full height. Long-caned shrub roses out in the open beds, too tall to stand on their own, arched over and pegged down. Their cane tips fastened toward the soil so the whole cane sweeps toward horizontal. And come June, flowering shoots rise along the entire arc like the teeth of a comb. Climbers fanned on the old brick walls. Same hormone, same physics, same result everywhere you look. Flowers along the whole cane instead of a tuft at the top. When your one rose on your one fence blooms from bottom to top next summer, it will be obeying exactly the law that fills that entire English garden, and not just gardens. The next time you drive past a commercial orchard, look at the trees. Apple and pear growers espalier their trees, training the branches out along horizontal wires in flat tiers, and they have done it for centuries, not because it is pretty, although it is, but because a horizontal branch converts its energy from tip growth into fruiting side shoots. Vineyard growers arch and tie grape canes along wires for the same reason. Bending toward horizontal shifts the plant from building taller to producing along its length. Fruit is just what happens after flowers, so the orchardist and the vineyard manager are playing the identical hormonal card you are about to play on a rose. Your fence is a very small orchard. The physics does not know the difference. At this point, you know the why and the shapes. What is left is the calendar, and the calendar begins with a warning I wish someone had given me. Train canes young. A first-year cane, green and supple, bends like a fishing rod. That same cane at 2 or 3 years old has laid down wood, and wood does not negotiate. Try to bend a mature woody cane to horizontal and it will fight you, crack, or simply refuse the bend, holding its curve for an afternoon and creeping back upright by the weekend. The window for shaping any individual cane is early in that cane's life, while it still moves freely in your hand. So here is the plan, year by year. Year 1, the year you plant, do almost nothing. And I know how that lands for gardeners of our generation who were raised to believe attention equals care. A newly planted climber is building its root system and its first set of main canes, and it needs every leaf it has. No hard pruning, no aggressive shaping. Remove wood that is dead or damaged. Tie the young canes loosely toward the structure, in roughly the direction you will eventually want them, and otherwise leave the plant alone to grow. A climbing rose usually takes 2 to 3 years to reach full flowering strength, no matter what you do. So year one patience is not laziness. It is investment. Training begins in earnest in the second season. And the classic moment on the calendar is late winter to early spring, while the rose is still bare. There is a real practical reason for that timing. With no leaves on the plant, you can finally see it. Every cane, the whole architecture, the way you can see a house's framing before the drywall goes on. Untie anything in the wrong place. Select your best main canes, spread them into the fan or the weave or the spiral, bend each one down into that horizontal to 45-degree range, and tie them off soft and loose. On a mild grey February afternoon, this is an hour of quiet, absorbing work, and it is the single most productive hour that Rose will receive all year. More new flowers come from that hour of bending than from any feeding, spraying, or watering you will do between now and September. Once the framework is trained, the yearly maintenance becomes almost mechanical, and this is the routine that university extension programs like the horticulture people at the University of Florida teach for climbing roses. The horizontal main canes are permanent. Leave them. They are the framework and they stay in place year after year. The vertical flowering laterals those canes produce are the renewable part. Each year after their bloom cycle, those laterals get cut back hard, down to 2 or 3 buds from the main cane. That short stub regrows fresh flowering wood for the next display, so the bloom wood renews itself annually on top of a framework that never changes. A main cane only comes out entirely when it dies, sickens, or crosses and rubs a neighbor, raw, and when one does come out, a young cane rising from the base gets bent and tied into the vacant spot as its replacement. That is the whole system. Permanent horizontal skeleton, renewable vertical bloom. One timing rule sits on top of all of this, and skipping it costs people an entire year of flowers. Know whether your rose blooms once or repeatedly. A repeat blooming climber flowers on the current season's growth, so it can be pruned in late winter with everything else. But a once blooming climber or rambler flowers on last year's wood. The flowering shoots for next June already exist right now, formed on wood the plant grew this past summer. Prune that plant in winter and you are carrying next year's roses to the compost pile in your own arms. Once bloomers get pruned and tidied immediately after they finish flowering in midsummer and not before. If you do not know which type you have, watch it for one season. One flush in June and done, it is a once bloomer. Flushes into September, it repeats. Time for the honest ledger, because I promised you practitioner truth, not a sales pitch, and training will not make a rose do everything. The bend redistributes bloom, it does not rewrite the variety. A repeat blooming climber typically carries somewhat stiff canes, somewhere in the range of 8 to 15 feet, and it will reward training with flowers along those canes in June, and then fresh flushes on into fall. A once blooming rambler is a different animal. 10 to 20 feet or more of wonderfully flexible cane, easy to bend, easy to spiral, and it will hand you one overwhelming June spectacle on old wood. Thousands of small flowers at once, and then it is finished for the year. No amount of sideways training buys a rambler a second act. Neither type is wrong. They are different contracts, and you should know which one you signed. And on either type, temper your first summer expectations. The first season after training, you will see real improvement. Laterals breaking low on the bent canes, flowers appearing where there were none. The full effect, the entire fence clothed in bloom from the soil line to the top rail, is a 2 to 3 year project as the framework matures and the laterals multiply. I am telling you that plainly because the gardeners who quit are almost always the ones who expected the whole miracle in one June. If this solved the mystery of your bare-legged rose, subscribe before you go. Practical, perennial craft like this every week from a gardener who made the mistakes first. Let me leave you back at that fence one last time, but let me repaint it. It is a morning in June, 2 summers from now. The party hat is gone because there is no bare pole left to wear it. The main canes run sideways along the rails like green cursive, and from every cane, flowering laterals stand up in ranks. There are roses at your knee, roses at your waist, roses at your shoulder, roses arching over the top rail against the sky, all open in the same week, and the fragrance pools along the fence line where you walk. Nothing about that picture is luck, and none of it took a stronger plant or a richer bed. It is what a climbing rose has wanted to do all along, the moment every bud along a sideways cane finally believes it is the top. You hold the twine, go tell them they are all in charge.